If it's Thursday, battling the extremes in the Republican Party and in our politics as hard-right conservatives cozy up to a dictator. Election deniers lead the party in Arizona, and another moderate is purged from the Republican caucus. Plus, basketball star Brittney Griner delivers an emotional plea for leniency as she is sentenced to 9 years in a Russian prison. We're going to speak with a top White House national security official about the ongoing efforts to get her and Paul Whelan home. And the White House announces it is officially declaring monkeypox a public health emergency. Officials are scrambling to increase the availability of treatments and vaccines. The emergency frees up cash. Hello there. Welcome to another episode of Meet the Press Now. I'm Chuck Todd. This week we saw some voters use the ballot box to fight back against out-of-the-mainstream policies or ideologies. NBC hasn't officially called these races yet, but in Washington state, voters appear to have used the state's top two primary system to essentially keep two Trump-backed election deniers off the ballot in November, potentially laying out a roadmap to fight the extremist wing of the Republican Party by simply changing election laws. In Kansas, voters defeated a ballot initiative that would have rolled back the state's constitutional protections on abortion, potentially laying out a roadmap for abortion rights activists to fight back against what they call extremist decisions by the courts in ways that are sort of jerry-rigged in our politics. All of this comes as we got a stark reminder today of how extremist ideas that go against the bedrock of our republic are on the move here in America. In Texas, a leading conservative group decided to welcome Hungarian strongman Viktor Orban for a speech today after he met with former President Trump in Bedminster. No word on whether the president of Hungary, a NATO member, wants to reach out and speak with the president of the United States, a NATO member. It's the same Viktor Orban who recently said that Europe did not want to become peoples of mixed race, a speech that was condemned by one of his own advisors as an embrace of Nazi ideology. Orban has also led a government that's passed anti-immigrant and anti-gay policies, and he's been the most pro-Putin leaders among our European Union allies during the war in Ukraine. Sharing top billing at this conference with Republican members of Congress, senators, and governors, Orban said that progressive liberals and communists are somehow the same thing. That's an old set of attacks and language that was used in this country by a guy named Joseph McCarthy, for what it's worth. Elsewhere in Arizona, Mark Finchem, the Republican who won the party's nomination for Secretary of State with less than 50% of the vote, wants to decertify the state's 2020 election. He's even claiming irregularities in the primary that he just won. And likely Republican gubernatorial nominee in Arizona, Kari Lake, currently leading in a race that is officially too close to call, is also claiming irregularities, but is yet to offer any proof of her charge. She's also called on her Democratic opponent, who is the state's current Secretary of State, Katie Hobbs, to be sent to jail for overseeing the 2020 election. Lake could advance to the general election also without winning a majority of her primary vote. But that's the way our system works in first past the post primaries and all of this stuff. Yet, as we mentioned, that it's not how they do things in Washington state, where the state's top two primary system appears poised to brush back some of the more fringy elements of the conservative movement. Incumbent Republicans Dan Newhouse and Jamie Herrera Butler both backed Trump's impeachment, and they are both on the verge of advancing to their general elections. Their Trump-backed challengers, they're not going to make it. It now seems clear that the best way for a moderate to survive in today's Republican Party is not to have to run in a traditional Republican small turnout primary. So I'm now joined by two of my NBC News colleagues. Gary Grumbach is at CPAC. Vaughn Hilliard has the latest down in Arizona. Let me start with Gary. Gary, I'm just curious of the reception that essentially this sort of authoritarian-leaning leader, Viktor Orban, who was elected by a democratic process in Hungary, but has been rolling back small d democratic aspects of Hungary's political process. How was he received? How was he treated? Was anybody skeptical of him being there?
You know, there were cheers, there was standing ovation, there was laughter throughout his speech. If you closed your eyes and you read a transcript, it sounded a whole lot like a speech from former President Donald Trump, having covered a number of those rallies as well. A whole lot of similarities there, including how he worked the audience. He joked about the fake news media. He was talking about a lot related to focusing on trusting Judeo-Christian traditions and the idea that anti-migration is the way to go. He also joked about the idea of pronouns and political correctness. I mean, it sounds a whole lot like what we've been dealing with here in the United States over the past 6 years. And I've talked to folks before his speech and after his speech. Before his speech, everybody was interested in what he had to say, even if they didn't know who he was. That was something we ran into quite a bit, was that folks simply didn't know who Viktor Orban was. But after his speech, we spoke to people who said, yeah, he gave a lot of ideas that perhaps could work in this country and perhaps could make this country a better place in their view. Chuck?
And Gary, I'm curious, what else are we hearing at this CPAC event this year? Is it looking backwards to 2020, or are they trying to look ahead? What has been the theme that you've been able to suss out?
It is definitely moving forward, but you got to remember, CPAC, of course, as you know better than almost anyone, was a very much a place and a home for conservatives all around this country. CPAC was that home. It's very much become the home for Trumpism and Trump world, and that's sort of who we're seeing in terms of who we're hearing from. We're hearing from Senator Ted Cruz, Senator Rick Scott, Sean Hannity of Fox News. We just heard from Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas. Very Team Trump folks. We're not hearing from the Vice President Mike Pence's of the world, the DeSantis of the world, the Kristi Noems of the world, and I think that does speak to where they want this conference to go, and the type of people that are here are very much pro-Trump going towards 2024.
Well, I have to tell you, I can't keep track. I know CPAC these days I feel like is more of an events business, because it does seem like they have a CPAC event about every 2 months in some part of either this country or somewhere around the world. Gary in Texas for us for this version of CPAC. Gary, thank you. Let me move over to Arizona, or Vaughn Hilliard is. And Vaughn, it is sort of an odd thing. Kari Lake is leading. You've got people that have been declared the winners of primaries, claiming irregularities. I guess it's just what they do. It's a talking point at this point. No evidence at all, right? Has anybody got anything to prove their claims here?
No, and she's really not all that interested now in having a conversation about fraud and irregularities in her primary, because she's declared victory now that she's up by 1.8 percentage points. And Kari Lake, where is her focus? Well, she's got a plane ticket to Dallas, because she's on the docket tomorrow to speak along with Tudor Dixon, Donald Trump's pick for Michigan governor, who also won her primary on Tuesday night. They're both on the lineup here for tomorrow at CPAC to join that Trump-aligned, essentially conservative political conference that this has become here, Chuck.
What about uniting the Arizona Republican Party? Are you seeing evidence that everybody's going to get behind these nominees? Or are there some that are not yet ready to embrace this very Trumpy ticket?
Right. So NBC News, we have not quite called it for Kari Lake, but our expectation is that her lead will expand based on the ballots that have not been counted and how they've trended in the past year. But if it is Kari Lake, you are looking at a very viable general election candidate. In large part, I mean, look, I asked her the question yesterday. You know, she took direct personal shots at the likes of Doug Ducey, right, her opponent Karen Taylor Robeson, and she said that she wants to be a welcoming party, and that, like any family, it's dysfunctional, but ultimately they come on board. And I was just having a conversation this morning in which I've been told that the RGA now has $11 million in TV advertisements space reserved here for the next 3 months here in Arizona, which would be an indication that the Republican Party is very much looking to surround itself around here, Kari Lake. You know, it's not unlike what we saw play out 7 years ago at the national level. Right. A lot of Republicans here have used expletives to describe Kari Lake and her campaign to me. But guess what? Ultimately, she's the Republican nominee here. And like we saw that happened around Donald Trump, there's a lot of people with interest at the legislative level. Right. And ultimately, if you're willing to push aside the election denialism and all that in order to get some of those priorities accomplished and done, you're looking at a party that has galvanized around this one individual.
And I'm just curious on this front. Doug Ducey, I believe, is helping to make RGA decisions right now as the outgoing governor of Arizona. Is he going to get on board officially, or Are they going to try to only run anti-Hobbs ads and then not help her? Like, are they going to try to draw lines here of distinction that some people may not see?
I'm waiting to get that answer myself, Chuck, here, and I think you just said it. The first two ads that the RGA, which he is the chair of right now, have put out have been anti-Katie Hobbs, the Democratic gubernatorial candidate, and there's so far been no pro-Kari Lake ads that have been put forward yet.
Vaughn Hilliard, and before that, Gary Grumbach, thank you. And Vaughn has just handed Gary his next assignment, which is to cover Kari Lake speaking there tomorrow, as well as Tudor Dixon. So I'm going to stay in the state of Michigan. I'm turning now to Michigan Republican Congressman Fred Upton. Congressman, it's good to see you. And before I talk to you about policy or politics, you're mourning the loss of a friend. Washington is mourning the loss of a member of Congress, 2 staff members. You know, we're all of us in political media and congressional world, we all sort of work the same way. And I know you're thinking a lot about Jackie Walorski and her family, as well as the 2 staffers.
Well, you know, the late report today is that a staffer was actually driving the car that crossed the line. But be that as it may, it really is a tragedy. We all have young staff. She was a great leader. She did a lot. You had her on the show, I'm sure, but she did a lot to recruit and elect fellow Republican members of Congress. I think we actually tripled our ranks from when she really got involved in this with Susan Brooks, former Indiana Congresswoman from Indianapolis as well. She and I, you know, I fly out of South Bend back to Washington every week, direct flights. And so she and I are on the same flight doing selfies with our constituents who know us both, because literally we're next to each other, sharing the state border with Indiana and Michigan. A wonderful woman, real leader on the Ways and Means Committee, and a stunning loss when we heard the news on Wednesday. Well,
look, it takes a special type of member of Congress to be trusted on the Ethics Committee, too, and I think that just says a lot about the respect she clearly she had in the chamber when you're on that committee. It's always a little, people take those appointments very seriously.
Nobody likes them. So usually you got to break, you know, I think Kevin McCarthy had to break an arm to get, because nobody wants to serve on that committee, and she was their chairman next year if the House flips. No,
it says a lot about the integrity that many people believed, and we know that she had. Let me move on to politics here a little bit, and we're talking about, I've been fascinated by the fact that, you know, we have watched what I call the silent moderate majority fight back in different ways, but the infrastructure of how we make decisions on policy, maybe sometimes by referendum, or how we nominate people. And I was thinking today about the top 2 system and what we're seeing in Washington State. If you had that in Michigan, would you have run for re-election if you knew the entire electorate would make the decision about whether they wanted you on the November ballot, not just a small group of voters?
Well, you know, it would have been a different equation for me. Maybe it would have happened. I mean, for me, it was redistricting, which really changed things for us. They sliced my district into half, and they put part of Lake Michigan, where I represent. I can actually see it across the lake from where I sit here in my house, with Lake Erie, 300-some thousand new constituents. And, you know, it's not just Washington State, actually, that has this system. California has it as well. Louisiana has it. Actually, if you get 50% of the vote in their primary, you win. You don't even have to face an election at all. So it's not something new. But yeah, it would have been a part of a different equation for us as we would have decided what we would have done.
I mean, look at it. Look, Peter Meyer. If we're having a top 2, top 3, top 4 system, he advances to the general election already, and it's a different conversation that voters get to have in November.
Exactly. And for him, his district, too, it changed a lot from the last election when he was first elected to what it is now. It changed dramatically with 200,000 to 300,000 new constituents based on the redistricting map that was decided finally last March.
What I know you're very upset about what the Democrats did in Peter Meyer's district, but I'm curious, where was the NRCC? Why didn't they help an incumbent? Where was Kevin McCarthy's super PAC?
Well, you know, as I understand it, there were some super PACs that were involved for Peter as well. CLF wasn't there, but I know Main Street was, Main Street PAC, some others is there as well. So there were sufficient funds. I mean, there were millions of dollars spent on his race. Again, the redistricting was a major factor, but so was Trump. I mean, Trump came in with guns a-blazing, picked a guy who has never lived in this part of the state at all. It just came literally to file the signatures and get on. And, eked out a very narrow victory that, frankly, even late Tuesday night looked like it might go the other way and support Peter.
How do you evaluate whether you're going to support somebody when it comes to this election denialism? The Secretary of State nominee in Michigan is an election denier. You've got this John Gibbs, against Peter Meijer. And, of course, Peter Meijer introduced him at a unity event, I think, yesterday. Is election denialism a bridge too far for you to support somebody?
It probably is for me. I mean, it's not just the Secretary of State here in Michigan, but so is the AG candidate for Michigan, also an election denier. And frankly, Tudor Dixon, who will be speaking at the CPAC convention, I think, tomorrow. Yeah. 5 Republican candidates for governor, all were election denials. It was 54,000 votes in Michigan, the difference between Biden and Trump. And no one has presented any evidence suggesting that there was fraud or abuse or whatever that would have overturned those results. In fact, there was a state Senate Republican investigation that went into looked at all the results and came clean. They said it's absolutely certain, and no one's come up with any evidence to the contrary. Sounds like you think that's disqualifying for Tudor Dixon? Or you don't plan to support her? Yeah, I've not actually met her. I think that, we'll see when the next poll comes out. I know I've already seen the ads for both candidates. It's only, 12 weeks away? But I'm sure that'll be an edge that our current governor, Gretchen Whitmer, despite the baggage that she might have getting through the COVID, she'll be able to nail Tudor Dixon with that pretty early. You're speaking like our friend Charlie Cook. You're not talking. You yourself. I know. You yourself. Can you support Tudor Dixon? Wolverine fan. Are you yourself going to be able to support her? It sounds like no. I don't know yet. I haven't met her. I haven't talked to her. I haven't known her campaign. It was just this week. It was expected that she was going to win, particularly the last couple of days, because, and I said from the start, whoever Trump was going to endorse was going to win this thing. I mean, it was just a real narrow race. He came out for her on Friday. She had a small lead at that point, and that overwhelmed the others that were in the race. So we'll see how this unfolds in the next couple of weeks. You're a guy that is worried about small d democracy around the world. I'm curious what you think of the CPAC folks embracing a guy like Viktor Orban. Well, you didn't have all the folks that were speaking there. I saw Matt Gaetz is speaking. I mean, I looked at the agenda of all the candidates, of all the individuals that were speaking at CPAC in Texas this week. It's on the edge, I guess you'd have to say. It's not something that I'm going to be following very closely. No, well, what does it say about where this Republican Party's headed if Viktor Orban is seen as a leading light to follow around the world? Yeah, well, trouble. I would say that trouble. I would say that it doesn't win a lot of tickets when you look at the November election. Maybe it'll win in August primary in some of these states, but I don't think it wins in November. I think the moderates will clearly find another avenue, a different candidate. Fred Upton, I know, like I said, I know you're mourning the loss of your good friend, Jackie Walorski. I appreciate you spending a few minutes with us, both remembering her and sharing your perspective on politics. Always good to be with you, Chuck. Thank you, Congressman. Still ahead, abortion rights opponents regroup after a defeat at the ballot box in Kansas. And later, we're going to talk to a member of the White House National Security Team as a Russian court sentences American basketball star Brittney Griner to 9 years in prison. Will she actually have to serve that? You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. The Kansas electorate surprised pretty much everyone Tuesday by overwhelmingly voting against a ballot initiative that would have removed constitutional protections for abortion in the state. In fact, Susan B. Anthony, Pro-Life America spokesperson Mallory Carroll, who backed the ballot measure, told the Washington Post the vote was, quote, a wake-up call for the pro-life movement. Kansas Republican Senator Roger Marshall, also very much pro-life, was quoted by Politico calling the result a gut punch, saying, quote,
I'm shocked, absolutely shocked, but regardless, I respect the process. It's not what I was expecting, not what I was told the polling showed. Even those who were campaigning against the measure were surprised by the margin. Did you foresee a double-digit win at all?
No, it absolutely was a possible win. But even folks like me who've been working in Kansas politics for 18 years were a little bit surprised by the margin.
And it's potentially opened a new strategy for abortion rights activists, making ballot initiatives a new battleground to protect abortion access. In November, at least 4 more states will vote on abortion-related ballot measures. 2 would expand abortion rights, and 2 would restrict them. Joining me now is Mallory Carroll, who I just quoted. She's the Vice President of Communications for Susan B. Anthony, Pro-Life America. I appreciate you coming on. So let me start with getting you to expound upon the wake-up call. What does that mean?
Yes, well, I think certainly the margins were the most shocking. I mean, we knew this was going to be close, but the 20-point margin, that was really huge. And it's a reminder to the pro-life movement that our job did not end on June 22nd when the Dobbs decision was made. This, in fact, opened up a 51 front battle where we've got to make our arguments in the public square in every state and in Washington, and especially heading into the midterm elections. Pro-life Republicans need to be very clear about their policy positions and go on offense to define their opponents. The abortion lobby in Washington, D.C. and pro-abortion Democrats in Congress have been very clear about what their national agenda is. So we want pro-life Republicans to call them out for that. If they don't, then they're going to be defined by their opponents, and that will not be good.
It's interesting what you said about essentially speaking, speaking out more. I wonder now, was it a mistake to not directly talk about what this referendum was, right? There was a lot in the pro-life community were saying, well, this isn't about an abortion ban. This isn't. And instead it was sort of got mealy-mouthed, where the opponents of this ballot measure, they had one message and it was pretty clear. It was confusing what the campaign on the yes side was saying, was it not?
Well, I would agree with that assessment that misinformation and confusion definitely had an impact here, and that the vote no side, they said that a vote for this ballot initiative is going to limit it's going to ban abortion in Kansas, even in cases where the life of the mother's health is at risk. And that's simply not true. I mean, the reality was that it was about neutralizing the state constitution so that lawmakers acting on the will of the people could pass pro-life laws in the state or not, about returning to that democratic process and the tools that our founders left us. So, yeah, that requires a bit more explanation. And the television ads that the Vote No side put together, they were filled with, anti-government mandate language and these scare tactics of women who said if they hadn't had their abortion, that they would, they wouldn't be here today. And the reality is that nobody on the Value Them Both campaign is advocating for an all-out ban on abortion. That this was about making sure that the people had a right to do that or any other pro-life measure that they wanted.
Isn't that the sort of the struggle, though, you're now having and I think within the pro-life community, which is, what is pro-life? Is it for exceptions? I think you advocate for some exceptions, I believe.
Absolutely.
But not everybody does, and not every, and I think there's been a lot of members of the movement that say, if you are advocating for exceptions, you're not pro-life anymore. Do you think you got a definition problem in the pro-life community?
I think that we haven't been helped at all by the media that is been not clear on what the pro-life position is. Abortion is the intentional taking of an unborn human life, and that's the goal. Treating an ectopic pregnancy, saving a woman whose pregnancy is threatening her life, that is not that's not the intentional taking of an unborn human life. And so we do have to be very clear about that. Chuck, this is a conversation that has been missing in our democracy for 5 decades now. And thanks to the Dobbs decision, now we have to go out into the public square and argue and debate, using the tools that the founders left us to reach consensus. And our message to pro-life lawmakers in the states as well as in Congress is be as ambitious as you can for life and do what is politically possible in the given context. Every incremental every incremental win, every protection for one child, if one child is saved, that is a huge win. Under Roe, people don't remember this. Even realize it, that under Roe, the United States, we were one of 7 countries, including China and North Korea, that allowed abortion on demand up until the moment of birth. So most Americans, while they may not hold my pro-life position, we can agree on a middle ground.
Well, and I guess that's the question, though, because we had a middle ground that was developing, and the courts, arguably took it away. I talked to a Republican pollster who's very frustrated, and he said, the irony is that the Mississippi law, which ended up overturning Roe v. Wade, 15 weeks, that was politically more sellable to a larger majority, but that got wiped away even in Mississippi. I mean, that's why I'm saying, do you guys have some in the pro-life community say no rape or incest exceptions, for instance? Is that where you are? Is that still considered pro-life if you are for exceptions for rape and incest?
That's not where I am. I think that these conversations are long overdue. And in the case of Mississippi, yes, it was their 15-week limit that went to the court that opened up the possibility now of states passing stronger protections. But Mississippi is a deeply pro-life state. They're ready for something earlier on. Maybe at the national level, all we can hope for is a limit on abortion at the point that babies can feel pain, which is that 15-week point. That would be a huge improvement from what we have now. So I wouldn't agree with you that we were achieving consensus and then that was wiped away. There was no consensus possible under the regime of Roe, and states for 10 years now and plus passing pro-life laws that were getting enjoined and tied up in the courts. That voice of the pro-life people acting through their pro-life representative having been prevented.
Let me ask you this. Do you think you would be in a better position today had the John Roberts compromise keeping Roe but redefining viability at 15 weeks? Do you think that would have been a better, a better long-term victory for the pro-life movement?
Absolutely not. There's no rationale behind viability at 15 weeks. That's just an arbitrary line that the justice would have put. I think we're in a much better position today. There's going to be pro-life wins there's going to be pro-life losses like we had in Kansas. This is the democratic process in action. I disagree with the voters in Kansas, but we've had so many pro-life wins in other states since June 22nd, and this is what this is the messiness of democracy that we're going to have to work through as a nation for the foreseeable future.
Mallory, Carroll of the SBA, Susan B. Anthony list. Appreciate you coming on and sharing your perspective with us. Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
You got it. It's been a busy week at the White House, particularly for the national security team. Major developments: Russia, Ukraine, China, and Afghanistan. Yeah, we got a lot to get to with John Kirby. He joins me live to discuss it all right after this. Welcome back. Between the killing of al-Qaeda's top leader, China conducting live-fire drills around Taiwan, and the sentencing of WNBA star Brittney Griner, it is, needless to say, a very busy week for the White House Foreign Policy Shop. It's always busy. It's just that we're paying a lot more attention. Earlier today, Griner, who has been detained in Russia since February, was officially found guilty in their court of law of drug possession and smuggling, and she was sentenced to 9 years in prison as well as a 1 million ruble fine, which is about $16,000 US. Prior to her sentencing, she made a final appeal to the judge.
I made an honest mistake, and I hope that in your ruling that it doesn't end my life here. I know everybody keeps talking about political pawn in politics, but I hope that that is far from this courtroom.
President Biden released a statement following the sentencing, emphasizing that Griner is being wrongfully detained by Russia, calling it unacceptable, and vowing that he would continue to work to bring home both Brittney Griner and Paul Whelan. So to dig into all of these developments, I'm joined now by John Kirby. He's the coordinator for strategic communications for the National Security Council. Previously, of course, was the spokesperson at the Pentagon. John, it's good to see you. So let me start with, I know there's a Secretary Blinken, Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, they're in the same country, in Cambodia. Is it possible we're going to see some progress on getting Brittney Griner and Paul Whelan home sometime this weekend?
Well, we want progress today, Chuck, and there's no reason that we couldn't have that. I mean, we've got a proposal that we put on the table, a serious one, and we urge the Russians to take us up on it so we can get Paul and Brittney back home. Now, I won't speak for Secretary Blinken, but it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility that he'll have an opportunity to talk with Minister Lavrov while they're there in the Southeast Asia region. But again, we're still working every day to try to bring this about.
Do you get the sense that Russia wants to deal on this, that they're just looking to see if they can get more? Have we gotten to the process where it's more about trying to land this, or do they even want to have a trade?
It's difficult to know exactly what's in the Russian head here. We don't know whether they're playing for time or are they playing for something bigger than what we offered. It's difficult to know. I mean, last week, Chuck, they threw in the name of a murderer who's convicted in Germany, and we didn't take that as a counteroffer at all. It was nothing more than a bad faith attempt to try to delay answering what is a serious proposal that's on the table. So it's difficult to know what's in their head. I can tell you what's in our head, because we made this proposal several weeks ago. Mm-hmm. We want those two Americans home. We're willing to make an offer here, and we urge them to take it.
I want to. The foreign ministers of Russia's in Southeast Asia. I'm going to stay in the region, but shift countries. First, has the president spoken with Speaker Pelosi yet since her visit to Taiwan?
He has not.
The current situation there, obviously, Japan felt as if their territory was threatened here. How serious are the next 72 hours? And do you sense that China is trying to do something even more egregious than simply having these live fire exercises?
I'll tell you what worries us the most right now, Chuck, is having all this military hardware flying, sailing, operating in close proximity to, of course, the Taiwanese forces. And that raises the risk of miscalculation. It raises the chances that something could go wrong inadvertently, and then you really do have a crisis on your hands. So the Chinese say they're doing exercises, and that is what they have appeared to be doing so far. We're going to watch this as closely as we can. The President decided to keep the USS Ronald Reagan aircraft carrier and a couple of her escort ships nearby just so we can monitor this. There's no reason for it to erupt in a crisis and conflict. Obviously, there's no reason, no pretext that's justified for the Chinese to act the way they have been acting in response to Speaker Pelosi's trip. But having acted the way they're acting and what we might anticipate coming in the next few days, it certainly does, as I said, raise the risk of miscalculation.
When the last time China did live fire drills like this, Bill Clinton was in office, and he responded by sending 2 different aircraft carriers into the area as sort of a bit of a warning sign, and it got the Chinese military to back down. Should we assume we're not going to just sit here and watch?
We got the Ronald Reagan's going to stay there and monitor this situation, Chuck. We're going to continue to consult with allies and partners. We're going to, and you'll see this in coming weeks, we are going to continue to fly, sail, and operate where international law permits, and that includes in the Taiwan Strait, and you'll see us do that in coming weeks. We're also going to be talking to allies like Japan about their readiness needs and capabilities and seeing if there's ways to work together to improve that, because, as you saw, the Japanese reacted very stridently to what they claim were missiles fired that landed into their economic exclusion zone. They take that seriously. We take that seriously.
Do you guys have a theory as to why, it feels like there's an average of 1 U.S. senator a month that visits Taiwan. So China can choose to be outraged by this at any moment in time. They chose to be outraged by Speaker Pelosi's visit. Do you really think it's justifiable, number one? And number two, what is our assessment as to why they've decided to be outraged by this visit as opposed to the visits by American elected officials on a monthly basis?
You captured it perfectly there, Chuck. They chose to be outraged. They chose to react the way that they are acting now in response to Speaker Pelosi's trip. Before she went, before it was even confirmed, we said that it doesn't matter. This is very much inconsistent. It's very consistent with our one China policy and very much consistent with previous travel by members of Congress who have a right and a responsibility to travel overseas as they see fit. There was no reason for them to overreact the way they've been overreacting. Now, why? I don't know. It's hard to get inside President Xi's head here to try to determine what's driving this. He has a lot on his domestic plate that is important to remember in terms of context here. He's got the party Congress coming up in a couple of weeks. He wants a third term, unprecedented. He's got COVID lockdowns he's dealing with. His economy's not doing as great as he claims it's doing, and he's got some issues there. So there's a lot on his domestic plate, too. That might have been factored into some of this decision making.
Look, are we aware that, you know, based on how we react could be based on how Southeast Asian countries decide whether they end up in the sphere of influence with China versus the sphere of influence with the West? How important is us handling this so that we don't let China's intimidation tactics essentially work with countries like Indonesia or the Philippines?
The main objective in how we handle ourselves in there is to take the tensions down. Everything we've done, everything we've said has been designed to de-escalate the tensions, to make it clear we don't want a crisis, we're not looking for one, and in fact, that's what responsible powers do. Now, obviously, we have close relationships with the ASEAN nations, and we want to see those relationships continue to improve and grow. Many of those nations are deeply concerned about China's coercive and aggressive activities, particularly in the South China Sea. And they've made no bones about that. In fact, they put out a statement yesterday, or maybe it was today, about their concerns over what Beijing is doing in terms of destabilizing activities in and around the Strait. So we're going to keep those relationships strong. 5 of our 7 treaty alliances, Chuck, are in the Pacific region. 5 of 7, and we take those commitments very seriously. One
question on the killing of al-Zawahiri in Afghanistan. The Taliban government said it's a violation of the Doha Agreement. But I am curious, the fact that the Taliban has responded with a press release, do you expect them to retaliate? Or is this one of those occasions where they know they got caught and they're just going to rhetorically say what they say and they're going to move on? The violation of the Doha Agreement was on their part. Let's be clear. They had agreed in that piece of paper that they weren't going to harbor terrorists inside Afghanistan that would pose a threat to the American homeland. They harbored Zawahiri. He's a threat to the homeland, and we took him out. I think that strike said a lot to the Taliban about how seriously we take our commitments. And look, if they, as they claim they do, they want to be seen as legitimate governors. They want financing. They want support from the international community. They want to open up. If you want all those things, you can't have that while you're harboring senior al-Qaeda leaders right there in downtown Kabul. There's no consistency there. Yeah, one wonders if they knew he was in downtown Kabul. It was either awfully brazen or they knew what could end up happening. It's fascinating. John Kirby, Strategic Communications for the National Security Team at the White House. It's always a pleasure to get your perspective. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Chuck. Good to be with you.
Up next, the White House declares officially monkeypox a public health emergency amid rising case counts. So what you need to know and why the emergency was declared next. This afternoon, Health and Human Services Secretary Javier Becerra officially declared monkeypox in the United States a public health emergency. So I want to get to our senior White House correspondent, Kelly O'Donnell. These things are always done about freeing up money. What do we need this money for, Kelly?
Good to be with you, Chuck. Sorry, I had a little conflict in my ear there, so I wasn't able to hear your question to me. But this got going today, in part because there's been a lot of criticism of the administration. Monkeypox has been known since May, and cases have been escalating quickly. It is now nearing 800,000 cases in the U.S. They've been doubling every 8 days or so, and there was pressure on the administration to do more, especially when some big cities were already declaring local emergencies. And part of what this will do is give better coordination in the use of vaccines and treatments and testing to try to make those more available. It gives you a sense of how hurried this was, even though it's been a while in the pipeline, because officials have not formally authorized all the elements of this national emergency and are considering some ways to give guidance to medical professionals about how they can use what is in the vials of vaccine to divide those doses to expand what is available. And so you get more than one dose out of a vial of vaccine. And they're providing the guidance for that, working on what the recommendations will be. So even though they're announcing it today, there are still more decisions to be made. The president and his team also have put together a FEMA coordinator who will oversee this. And Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary, says we will see the top administrators who will be overseeing the monkeypox response in the briefing room soon. So it's a ramping up of an issue that has been a public health crisis, now a national emergency, over a period of weeks. And this is something where they want to show they're taking action after there have been a lot of complaints that they needed to do more. Chuck?
Kelly O'Donnell with the decision and explaining the decision behind the administration deciding to declare a public health emergency. It is always about freeing up some dollars so they can not have to go to Congress. Kelly O'Donnell at the White House for us. Kelly, thank you. Up next, panel time. Fringe politics, abortion rights, the battle for control of Congress. Let's get other takes. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. As we noted at the top of the show today, there is a battle right now in our politics, not just between mainstream and insurgent wings of any singular political party, although those take place, but it's also a battle to represent, quote, mainstream America. So for more, let's turn to today's panel. Republican strategist Brendan Buck, Politico national political reporter Betsy Woodruff Swan, and Democratic pollster Cornell Belcher. I want to start with the definition of pro-life, because it does seem all of a sudden now, and Brendan, I'll start with you. This is your side of the aisle. What pro-life stood for pre-Roe and what pro-life stands for now, I think there's a little bit of confusion. That's a problem, isn't it?
Well, nobody's had to grapple with it for a long time. You know, you've had states going, state by state, trying to go kind of as far as you can. But at the national level, where a lot of these politics are defined, federal lawmakers have kind of just punted on it. So you haven't had as much conversation about it. And the status quo, I think, has sort of worked for both sides. Republicans in Washington have been able to say, we'd love to go further if we can, but, we're just going to have to fight. Now, these are really difficult questions and with real moral implications. And, it's going to take a little time to settle out. But I think what Republicans are pushed for is their base wants politicians to go really, really far. And that is proving quite unpopular.
Yeah, Betsy, it seems as if like I said, I talked to a Republican pollster who was like, 15 weeks. 15 weeks works. I can sell 15 weeks. And he's like, well, that was the actual Mississippi law. And he sits there and it's like, I think, and he sits there, he's like, I think we've thrown away some elections, this midterm over this.
For Republicans, it's very much the dog that caught the mail truck when it comes to the abortion issue. For decades, it was really easy to say that all you wanted to work toward was overturning Roe v. Wade. And politically, that was a great message, because if you're a member of Congress or you're a senator, maybe once or twice in your entire career, you'll have a single vote that could, decades down the road, impact it. But all of a sudden now, because the issue has been returned, not just federally, but also at the state level, everyone has to have a specific answer about where to draw that line. And that's why you have this enormous tension and a lot of concern within the GOP about how the party might be able to unite, if at all, around this very politically intense issue.
Well, Cornell, I remember about a month ago you thought this could be helpful to the Democratic cause in the midterm. I mean, is it now, I guess the question is, do you run only on abortion or do you run on abortion and?
Well, you know, it's always and. I mean, no one variable is always at the center of, or seldom is one variable the center of our politics. I will say this. I think part of the issue here is that, and I've seen this in our data, where you have frequent churchgoers, and I pay attention to the frequency of churchgoing more so than I say the people say they're evangelical, but people are in church 2 or 3 times
that's different than
that's different from evangelical. And what I'm seeing in data is that people are in church frequently are not necessarily for abortion, but they're not for overturning Roe v. Wade. Right. And I think that's the crosshair that you have here. And I think that's the crosshair that you saw in Kansas, where you saw, quite frankly, an astonishing result that shocked a lot of us. But it is this ideal that, you know what, I may not be for abortion, but I'm not for this sort of dangerous government overreach also, which is a middle-of-the-road conversation.
Brendan, I'm really struck by Roger Marshall's reaction, because it was, to me, very honest. But it also, to me, exposed what I think is an issue inside the GOP in the elected world. He goes, I'm shocked. I'm absolutely shocked. I respect the process. It's not what I was expecting. It's not what I was told the polling showed. You know, in the same way that you had people on the left that thought defund the police could be popular if we explain it better. And then they found out, no, we live in a bubble, and more people are figuring out they live in a bubble. Are there too many Republican politicians that don't realize that position is actually not a majority position, no matter how you explain it, and they don't realize it?
We've spent decades saying we just want to send this back to the states so states could have reasonable limitations. And I think that's the political middle ground, some type of reasonable, however you define that, middle ground. But this whole debate is now being defined by a few states that have gone much further, than what some people are talking about. And I think the vote in Kansas was defined as there's going to be no exceptions on abortion in this state, and there's no way that's popular.
How did Mitch McConnell get caught saying, well, maybe we would consider a federal ban? I mean, I'm just saying, that has got to be something he wishes. I know he never has regrets, or if he does, he doesn't tell us. That's words he wishes he never had escape his mouth, right?
They're not going to bring that up. I think if Republicans take back control of, I've had a lot of my friends on the left thinking that there's going to be all these big votes in the House and the Senate on abortion. I don't think Republicans want to touch this. I think they know very well.
Good luck with the House, as you know.
I don't think that they would have the votes if they wanted to do something like that.
The other part about this, though, Chuck, is that we don't need the votes on it. Because, I've just spent the last couple of days looking at clip after clip after clip of Republican House candidate already talking about this issue. And better believe it's going to be in advertising, and clip after clip of Republican Senate candidates. Most Republicans are already on record on this, and certainly when talking to their donor class, they are certainly on record about where they are on choice.
I want to shift the conversation a little bit, Betsy, which is that we're finding out where the silent moderate majority, how they can strike back. But it only is if they have the ability to, right? A referendum, they can come out and speak. The top 2 primary system. It is interesting to me that if you have it's sort of like if you have the opportunity to express yourself, the silent moderate majority can.
Well, and we also saw that in California with the referendums that recalled the district attorney in San Francisco, school board members in San Francisco. The thing about the Kansas vote that I think should give Democrats just a little, cause for pause is that abortion literally was on the ballot in Kansas, and there appeared to be more people voted in that referendum, I believe, than in recent primaries, which shows that having the word on the ballot actually played a major role.
Itself had more votes than the entire turnout of the last 2.
There were people who went in and voted just on that and then left. But that's also part of the point is that, listen, 5-6 months ago, and we talked about this 5-6 months ago, I didn't know what was going to mobilize Democrat voters. I didn't know what was going to mobilize women voters. Now I kind of think we have a chance to mobilize some of these voters in a way that we didn't 6 months ago.
I think that's definitely true. And I think the challenge for Democrats is maintaining credibility with voters who care deeply about abortion rights, but perhaps don't have a commitment to the Democratic Party, where on a single issue, it's much easier for them to say thumbs up, thumbs down. But when it comes to a more complicated person running against another person, where they're thinking about a broad panoply of topics, it might not be galvanizing the same way it is.
Brendan,
imagine that's something Democrats are working.
You had said, look, I do not think that the House or Senate's going to do this if they get control. Do you think McCarthy and McConnell could politically, publicly say that without making the base go crazy?
Maybe not, but just, look, as Betsy said, I've served in the House for a long time. We weren't having a lot of abortion votes when they were in the majority the first time.
Well, but Roe is law of the land.
was all delayed, but there are good things you could have done, and there are certainly people out there who want you to do things. But I think the Republican message is going to be, the whole point of this was to send it back to the states. This is a state decision. We have no role to play in here. Well, will there be people demanding that they do something? Yes, but I think they know politically, these are two political animals, that this doesn't work for them.
Would it be helpful or hurtful if Donald Trump came out and said, boy, maybe they went too far?
Oh, boy.
Because it does sound like that's what he thinks. Like, we all know he clearly is nervous about this legacy.
Well, he was pro-choice at one point.
Yeah.
Well, that would be the more popular position to have, so maybe that is helpful.
I am going to be fascinated to see. I don't think he can help himself. He's going to comment on this at some point. Brendan, Betsy, Cornell, thank you. And thank you all for being with us this hour. NBC News Now coverage continues on time today with my friend Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.